Okay, welcome back. This is section 4.2, and this is notes about percent notation. And what we want you to be able to do by the end of this is write the three kinds of notation for percent. And then we want you to be able to convert between percent notation and decimal notation. All right. So when we have this, and this part right here is just a general definition for what percent notation means. And when we have percents, that means n per 100. Okay, so think about your grade. Okay, so if you think about your grade in this class, let's say that you have an 83%. Okay, typically that's calculated by taking 83 out of 100. Okay, and that's the idea. So the first thing that you can do to convert n percent is to simply just write it as n over 100, which is what I did here. Okay. Now a way to manipulate this number here, 83 over 100, I could think of this as taking 83 times 1 over 100. Okay. Now, I'm a big fan of rewriting numbers as the product of two numbers, but if I were to multiply these numbers, and this is 83 over 1, and I do that, okay, if 83 times 1 is going to give me 83, 1 times 100 is going to give me 100. So I can rewrite it as multiplying by 1 over 100, okay? Then what I could do is I could say, well, 1 over 100 is really just 0.01. So I could say, 83 times 0.01, okay? So what I can do is I can take this fraction here, 83%, which we'll just call your grade. I could write it as a fraction, 83 over 100. I could say that it's 83 times 1 over 100. Or I could say that it's 83 times 0.01, okay? All three of those work, all right? And that's what we have here, all right? That if we write some percentage, I can write it as a ratio of n over 100. I could write it in fraction notation and say that n% is n times 1 over 100, okay? I could take it in decimal notation and say that n% is n times 0.01, okay? And so let's go ahead and let's do that for this one down here, okay? We're going to do the same thing. Now, all of this is just a definition. Kind of did that same thing with your grade over here, all right? So if I write three kinds of notation for 67.8%. Now, if I wanted to write that in a ratio, okay, then I would write that as 67.8 divided by 100, okay? If I wanted to write that as a fraction, okay, then I would write that as 67.8 times 1 over 100. If I want to write that in decimal notation, all right, then I would write that as 67.8 times 0.01, all right? And those would be my three kinds of notation for that. All right, so now what I want to do is kind of go ahead and go back to that grade scenario where we were taking 83 and we were multiplying that by 0.01, okay? Now, when I multiply those two numbers and I do that in the calculator, what I end up getting is an answer of 0.83 as a result. Now, one of the concepts here is that really all that happens is when you multiply by this number, you actually move the decimal place from here. Okay, so what happens is that when you're converting from a percent to a decimal, here's where your decimal is here, and we simply just move it over 2 units, and it gives us 0.83, okay? And so that's what we're going to do in this next part down here. So converting between percent notation and decimal notation, and this means that we're going to move the decimal place. So move the decimal 2 spaces to the left. Okay? So if I come over here and I want to find the decimal notation for this, all right, I'm just going to move this decimal 2 spaces to the left. So I'm going to go over 1 and then 2. I'm going to put my number there. And then my decimal notation is going to be 0.9944. And that's my answer. And that's all I'm doing. Okay? On the next example, okay, this says the interest rate on a 2.5-year certificate of deposit is 6 3/8%. So it says find the decimal notation for 6 3/8%. So I'm going to write this down over here. Okay, I'm going to write 6 3/8%. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this number into an improper fraction. So I'm going to take 8 times 6, which is 48, plus 3, which gives me 51. So this is 51/8%. All right. And what I'm going to do is, all right, so once I get 51 over 8, what I want to do is just, I can take 51 and divide that by 8, and we can put that into the calculator and just do that. And that's going to give me 6.375%. Okay, so all 3 of these things are the same. Okay, this is a mixed number, this is an improper fraction, this is a decimal. Okay, and we want to get to the point where we're putting this into a decimal. All right, so however you get from this step to this step is up to you. All right, so now what I have is, I have this decimal here, and remember, I'm going to move this decimal 2 units to the left. And the reason why I'm doing that, we can do that just moving it over, okay? I got to put a 0 here if I do that, okay? So I have to do 0.06375, okay? And this is in decimal notation, and this is in percent notation, okay? So we're just moving that decimal, okay? And really, remember, guys, what we're doing is you're either dividing this by 100, okay? You could do 6.375 divided by 100, and it'll get you this answer too, okay? Or if we're just going from percent to decimal, we just move that decimal place over 2 units, okay? All right, so now let's talk about the other way. Let's talk about going in between decimal notation and percent notation. So we're going the opposite way. So in the other one, what we did was you take your percentage and you divide by 100 to get your decimal, okay? Or you can take your decimal or your percentage and multiply it by 0.01 to get your decimal. So what we can do here to go from decimal to percent notation is we can multiply by 100. All right? Or you can move the decimal places 2 units to the right. So move decimal place, decimal, 2 units to the right. Okay? So if I come over here and it says find the percent notation for 5.6, I could do 5.6 and I could multiply that by 100. And what that's going to give me is that's going to give me 560%. Okay? I could also just take the number 5.6 and then move the decimal place to the right 2 units. Okay? And if I don't have any number here, then I need to put a 0. And so that would then just give me 560%. Okay? So it's all about just moving that decimal place. Okay? If you're going from a percent to a decimal, you move it to the left. If you're going from a decimal to a percent, you move it to the right. Okay, so go ahead and check out Your homework on 4.2, go ahead and do every other odd on that one.